My workshop is sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek called How to Do Family Therapy Really, Really Well, which is setting myself up, but it's also got a serious edge, and that is that there's a lot of evidence-based programs now for working with young children with behavioural and emotional disorders, triple P,
Yeah.
PCIT,
Yep.
our program and so on. But they're very formulaic, they're very manual driven, and they're
Yes.
quite good.
Mm.
But my workshop focuses on is how do you actually make this stuff work? And the content of these treatments are all very well, but you've actually got to get parents to turn up and
Yep.
be interested and engaged. And so what I do in this workshop is present my experience, 30 years of doing this kind of treatment, for what you need to do to get mums and dads in through the door, get them engaged, get them so that they're primed, that they're motivated to change and actually get change. And
Yeah.
so the real kind of inside clinician story on how to do, the kind of the things that aren't in the manual, beyond the manual, if you like.
Yes. Yeah. Oh no, that sounds interesting, because I noticed some of the work you've been doing lately has been looking at fathers' engagement in some of those therapy sessions, because it's much lower than mothers, obviously. And
Yes, we benchmarked father involvement around the country as part of our project, and the average is about 40%. Where there is a father available in the family, they come to about 40% of sessions. In our clinic, we've got that up to 75% now by having a very simple engagement model, which is just how you talk to fathers, and it takes just one session to implement. And they come through the door at much, much higher rates, which is really good for the outcomes for the child.
yeah, it is. Yeah. And I certainly have had looked at the literature in the past to know that, fathers have such a significant impact on, say, adolescent mental health if they've got a good relationship with with a father figure in their life. So it's really important for them to be involved, isn't it? So that both parents are on the same page with the therapy and the behavioural changes that they might be implementing.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, you got it there. It's about the direct effect of the father on the kids, but it's also the indirect effect of the two parents working as a team.
Yeah.
Two parents there, it's critical that they work as a team. And when you've got a child who's got massive behaviour problems, one of the first things that falls apart is the parental teamwork.
Yeah, yeah. And I can imagine those kids would be pretty good at sort of separating those parents and, working on them separately to, manage to get their own way and things like that. Yeah.
That's right. As Jerry Patterson said many years ago about these treatments, everybody is a victim and an architect of these family problems.
Yeah.
And so you really have to address the individuals, but also the systemic aspects of these problems in order to get real change. I
noticed that Eva did some research with PCIT and callous and unemotional sort of 3 to 6 year olds, and you got really amazing results. But PCIT is quite an intensive program, isn't it? Like 20 to 40 sessions. So sort of the cost in implementing that and expecting parents to commit to that is incredibly high.
Yes, well, the data on getting change in kids with high CU traits is not in yet.
Okay.
She certainly showed a pre-trial information that it may have effects on these kids, but there hasn't been a randomised controlled trial yet to show that these things work with these kids. But you are right. PCIT is very intensive. It involves real hands-on training where the parents are actually trained and coached in the clinic to actually implement time out and so on. So very intensive training, but it also involves a lot of warmth and kind of attachment type concepts as well. So it's a really good example of the contemporary parent training programs that are very positive, have very good effects and so on.
Yeah. We I did work in a child and family service for about 16 months, and we did have a PCIT clinic. I wasn't trained in it, but I did observe some of the services, and it does require a very high skill level to as a therapist to implement, and a lot of training as well. Yeah. But overall, it does seem that early investment is worthwhile, isn't it? Getting in quite early with the children and before the problems worsen in teenage years, or we're seeing sort of more, catastrophic behaviour.
Absolutely. I mean, you can get change with teenagers, but it's so much harder.
Yeah.
It really is. And we really define our sweet spot now for these behavioural and emotional programs as kind of 2 to 8, where I think, you get most of your bang for your buck there. And, psychology can be incredibly proud of these programs. If you look at the 2 great achievements of clinical psych in terms of treatment, it's probably CBT for anxiety and depression in adults, and parent training programs for young problems in kids. And if you catch it early, they really do have quite a substantial effect. And, it's such a shame when you look at the data indicating that only, a maximum of a quarter of kids that need these programs are still receiving them in Australia. So they're fabulous programs. There's something we can be very proud of, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of skilling up the workforce and making them available to everybody.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem, isn't it? It's quite an intensive program. In a private service, it's difficult to sort of, under the Medicare system to provide the level of intervention that's required. But, the public health service is just overwhelmed.
Well, I mean, ours is only 10 weeks, and we get, pretty much the same effects as PCIT.
Okay.
You can also get, substantial effects with a brief input like that. Ours is a very intensive model, but it's not so much focused on the training of time out and so on in the room. Ours is very much focused on the parents' state and their attributions and their teamwork, and empowering them very quickly to try and get change in the child. But, we just feel like we train so many clinicians to do this, but it still isn't reaching everybody. The data is clear. A lot of families are not getting these treatments. And even one of the things that I find the most frustrating is the people I've trained to do this treatment now with intense internships in our clinic, they often go into private practice, and then they do individual work with the child.
Yes.
And I say, come on, what are you doing? We all know that there's no evidence that works for kids with young conduct problems. And they're like, well, that's what the parents are happy with, and that's what Medicare pays for. They're like,
yes.
That's very frustrating.
It's also like I notice, the Prime Minister's just given $52 million to Headspace, because the issue of suicidality. But, because obviously it's quite at a crisis with the high rate of suicide in, 14 to 25-year-olds. But then, they're overlooking that money might be well spent as well at that lower age group. But the problems aren't as severe, so therefore that doesn't get the media coverage and you don't get the funding. Is that something you see as a bit frustrating as well? Or?
Look, I think that's a very, very good point. It's a very brave politician that's going to take away money from youth mental health and move it earlier, because there's so much acute demand in that, and they're not meeting the needs of people in the teenage and the youth kind of area. So I always think it's incredibly frustrating that more isn't spent earlier on early intervention and so on. However, you can't take it away from the spending in the youth and early adult period, because it's desperate needs there as well. It's got to be made from somewhere else. What's the answer to that? I don't know, but it's a problem that needs to be solved, because we know that you get a lot of output and change for early intervention with kids.
And what about this? Do you think there's a role in positive psychology to better equip kids as for life stresses? Do you think there's a bit of hot housing these days with parents and like preventing their children from experiencing any suffering, really?
That sounds like a very interesting question. Can you just clarify what you mean by that?
Well, parents don't want their children to experience any negative emotion, so they're very protective of them. And I suppose this is anecdotally what I've seen. I don't know. I haven't actually read the research in this, but I wonder then that these children who have never experienced disappointment or failure or or felt sad in their younger years, when they start to then experiencing increased stresses in their teenage years and going through a lot of those emotional changes, have never learnt to develop good resilience or
Yes, it's a very interesting idea, that, isn't it? And there could be some truth in that. I mean, the self-esteem movement, with the idea that children should just be exposed to just positive experiences and everyone's got to be a winner and all that sort of thing, certainly copped a bit of flack in that regard about, come on, you've got to face the fact that there are disappointments and you are not always going to be the winner and all that. And I've got a real soft spot for that, kind of letting children be exposed to just the general day-to-day adversities of life, for sure. It's hard to know if that's the cause of the current epidemic in mental health problems, I think about this, and we talk about this in the clinic all the time. What is going on? Why is depression increasing? Why is anxiety still such an incredible problem? And, I was talking to Tony Jorm about this the other day, one of Australia's leading thinkers in clinical psychology. And he was saying to me, no matter how much we throw at these problems in terms of CBT and antidepressant medication and all that sort of stuff, the rates are staying level or going up. So something is wrong. My feeling is it's probably something about the way children are being raised early in life, but I don't know. That's a very, very difficult thing to make conclusions about. But something is definitely wrong. No matter how much we throw at these things psychologically, we are not getting them to come down. We're not getting suicide to come down. We're not getting depression to come down. We're not getting anxiety to come down, even when we make these evidence-based treatments available.
Yeah.
So we definitely need some creative thinking there. And I suppose, my bias is get into the family, get in early, get in with children, where you're building that kind of resilience in the first few years of life.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay. So what we're saying is, yes, definitely early investment is worthwhile, but, how do we sort of market that to the politicians to increase those services and increase training, probably even within clinical psychology, to produce better, therapists who know how to work more effectively with children.
Yes, well, that's where my interest is. What I focus on is trying to get the workforce that's there, the services that are there, to be able to implement these kinds of evidence-based parenting programs, family therapies. We know they work. They can be done quite briefly and so on. And so I think it's really critical we get those out. But, I've been working for the last decade or so with Royal Far West in Sydney, and they are a country health service for children.
Yes. Yep.
Really interesting. They started off working with things like polio and typhoid and dental problems for kids in the bush and everything like that. It's interesting now, some of their most common referrals and so on are for autism, ADHD, conduct problems and so on. Mental health problems are rife, and in the bush they're particularly rife, and there's no services. So for the last several years, we've been developing and evaluating online services now, online parent training programs for these kids, and evaluating them with country children. And it's really wonderful. We've got the data in now that a therapist-assisted online program has the same effects as face-to-face. And we have ParentWorks now, which is a purely online program where parents can go online and do it without a therapist, and that has reasonable effects on child and parent mental health as well.
Okay. Well, I think as people become more au fait or, more comfortable using technology, that, the e-therapy is going to work, isn't it? And obviously, the software is more accessible for people to use. So, 10, 15 years ago, the software wasn't there and people didn't have access. But as time goes on, we're all incredibly comfortable. For example, just doing this interview via Zoom.
Right. But it was very interesting though, when I was supervising the clinicians who were doing the online treatment, they still had to work with the same engagement issues of trying to get the father involved, trying to get mum and dad to operate as a team, trying to help the parents deal with their attributions of why the child is acting like this. So we still were having to do these very intensive type process management of the family, engagement management. And that's really in the workshop what I'll be talking about. So it was, interesting for me that even going online, we still found that, these issues of how you join with a family and how you get them to change were still critical element.
Oh, that's fascinating, isn't it? But it's wonderful that the medium is working effectively, and so we can access those people in more regional, remote areas. But it's a way of increasing engagement with fathers, isn't it? Because if they've got other children that need to be babysat, logistically coming in and attending a therapy session can be quite difficult. So it removes some of those barriers for people.
Yes, that's a very, very good point. To make it across Sydney, just to make an appointment at our clinic can, take most of your day. It's terrible. And, we, in our data, indicated that the fathers actually expressed a fairly strong preference for the online treatment so that they could be involved. So I think this kind of technology is going to really, really have a big benefit for father engagement and for engaging very busy people.
Yeah. All right. So is that where you sort of see the future is going, in the e-therapy? What is it? Scheme, arena?
I think it's just part. I think online treatments are just part of the armament, if you like.
Yep.
There's always going to be room for face-to-face for the most difficult cases. There's going to be therapist assisted online. There's going to be purely self-driven kind of autonomous online programs. I think we need all of these things as part of our armament to make a kind of complete mental health service.
Okay. And where do you see your research going in the future? Or your next projects?
Well, look, at the moment our research keeps going off in very different directions. So on the one hand, we're still working on evaluating online parenting programs and training programs for practitioners to try and have maximum reach into the community. On the other hand, I'm incredibly interested in the kind of neurobiology of child development and mental health. And so at the moment, we're very excited. We're running a trial to look to see if our parenting program produces change in the child's epigenome. And so this is how the child's genetics are translated into their cell functioning and so on like that. And we now know that the epigenome is sensitive to the environment. So the way our genome is operating is sensitive to the experiences we're having as we grow up. And we believe that these parenting programs probably do change the epigenome of the child by reducing risk for ongoing mental health problems. So at the moment, we're treating many, many kids in our clinic and measuring their genetics pre and post the 10-week parenting program to see if we're actually changing their genome.
Oh, okay. That's really leading edge then, isn't it? Very sciencey or scientific, I suppose. Yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or?
No, just that, if you come to the workshop, then as I said, I'll be covering going beyond the manual.
Yeah.
What is it that you need to know to really make this stuff work in day-to-day clinical practice?
And I think that's an important thing, isn't it? It's one thing to read a manual and then you get out there and try to implement it, and it's like, oh, what do I do with this situation and that situation? Or how do I engage, the people and actually get it to work? So it's, one thing to read it in a manual, but another thing to
do it.
To do it, yes, right. Okay, thanks so much, Mark, and lovely to meet you, and I look forward to meeting you next year at the conference.
Thank you so much. Lovely to chat. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.